because of the newspaper writings, we started getting phone calls from all over the country into Dr. Vincent's personal cardiology office and also at the Keating Laboratory. In the process of that, and because of all of these phone calls, Dr. Vincent just turned to me and he said, I've been thinking, what do you think about starting a foundation for this? Because now we didn't know there were so many people who were affected by unexplained sudden death, syncope, all of these other things. And so people were wondering if these events that were occurring in their families, especially the unexplained sudden death that could have been generational, they were calling to see, did they have this abnormality? I thought the idea was absolutely fabulous because I was fielding all of these phone calls and I couldn't say, well, yes, you do, or no, you don't. You know, you've got to see a cardiologist, blah, blah, blah. So that was kind of the idea behind it. We had our first announcement of the SADS having been organized in December of 1991. But, you know, it was just a very small sort of gathering. There was Dr. Vincent and David and I. And plus there were a few people from the newspapers in Salt Lake City. And there was a gentleman by the name of Joe Graves and his son. Now, Joe Graves was the husband of the first woman who came to Dr. Vincent's awareness from having died of sudden unexplained death. So this was sort of where it all started. And that's why the Graves were there, because it had taken almost 20 years for them to participate in something that had actually taken the life of his wife. At this point in time in the late 80s, they were just starting to screen the genome for different disorders. Dr. Vincent was, you know, quite visionary, really. And he said, well, with the pedigree now in hand, would you like to go with me up to the University of Utah and explain this pedigree to the scientists up there to see if our pedigree would be worthy of genetic research? And so they said, well, what is lung QT? We never heard of that. So Dr. Vincent explained that. And then we proceeded to unroll this probably 20-foot pedigree. And they were staggered by the breadth of it and the information that was contained within it. So although they had never heard of lung QT, they felt like that the pedigree was sufficient enough to at least look at it. So they accepted our information. Dr. Vincent loaned me to Mark Keating to help get this project going. It would take us another 5 years to figure out what the gene was and where it started, where it ended, that sort of thing. But that's kind of how the research started. It was Dr. Vincent's vision, but we went to the best in the field, and they accepted what I had done for the pedigree, and we got the best brain in the world to head the project. The foundation was very, of course, small. It was just the three of us, actually. Within our mission of SADS, we wanted to not only make the population or the country aware that lung QT really existed, But we wanted to help families, but probably even, I shouldn't say more importantly, but equally important, we needed to educate cardiologists about this because very few knew much about the disorder. So we were hand stuffing envelopes when people would contact us. There wasn't a lot of email at that point in time. There was some, but not a huge amount. And after we had sort of gotten going a bit, probably a couple of years, then some of our articles that we were writing, or that other families, we were encouraging families to write up their stories and put them in newspapers for more awareness. And one of these articles sort of filtered into Toronto, Canada, where a woman by the name of Pam Husband read about the article. And she called the SADS office and wanted information. And then she decided to publish her story. Her 16-year-old son had died of sudden unexplained death. And then the only information they were giving was our SADS phone number. So people were calling from Canada to Salt Lake City to get information. And then Pam decided that she wanted to start a sister foundation. And that became known as the Canadian SADS Foundation. So that started the development of other groups of the SADS Foundation. We now have them probably in 6 or 8 different countries. And I am so, so delighted that SADS has progressed like they have, especially under Alice Laura's leadership. You know, we struggled along all those early years. And then after we had, I don't remember how many years we were in existence. It was probably 7 or 8 maybe, because it's 30 years now. But Alice has been with us for at least 20 years. And she is remarkable. So grateful for her. Timothy syndrome, of course, is very dear to my heart. In the early days, especially when, after we had our genetic finding published for the first gene, we started finding many other genes. Well, at least a few. One of the directors, producers of Hollywood films happened to have a child. This was about in 1992. He had a child that had this condition. This wasn't known to be a condition at that point. It was referred to us as long QT associated with syndactyly. Well, I started going around and visiting these families as well, because Mark Keating and I, we could not figure out how this was inherited. And no one actually really believed me when I would tell them, you know, these kids are having problems with their lungs. These kids are having problems with hypoglycemia. These kids are being evaluated for autism. These kids have terrible dental issues. No, doesn't relate to anything. But I just kept keeping these logs and expanding on more and more problems that these kids had. Because now I had a huge investment of my heart in these children and their families. And he told me that he had just identified it. And then Mark said, "What did you say these kids had? Did you say they had autism?" And I said, "Yes." "Did you say they had this, did they have that?" So on and so forth. And I said, "Yes." And he said, "That's remarkable. This particular calcium channel gene expresses in almost every tissue of the body. So the things that you had been collecting and logging now make sense because of all of this. So that was the reason Mark was very generous and named the syndrome Timothy syndrome.